My name is Avery Collins. I'm 22, and I used to believe embarrassment was just the price of living under someone else's roof. That belief shattered on my dad's 60th birthday in our own backyard, with 35 people watching and smiling like they were waiting for a punchline. I had been up since 5 that morning, following a long list of chores I didn't write, but somehow always owned. Setting up chairs, wiping tables, and trying to make everything look perfect so he wouldn't find a reason to explode. I'd saved for months for a small gift, the kind you buy when you're trying to say I love you without having enough money to prove it. When it was time for presents, I stepped forward and placed it in his hands, hoping for one normal moment. Just one. He didn't smile. He didn't even look at me the way a father looks at his kid. He held my gift up between two fingers like it was dirty, and his voice cut through the yard loud enough to silence every conversation. He called it worthless. He called it junk. And before my brain could catch up, his palm cracked across my face so hard my vision flashed white. I heard someone gasp. Then I heard something worse. A little burst of laughter that tried to pretend it was all fine. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my sister's phone pointed straight at me, capturing everything for her followers, like my humiliation was content. My cheek burned, my throat tightened, and I realized this wasn't about a gift. It was about reminding me who I was in that house. I didn't scream, I didn't beg. I just turned and walked out, because staying would have meant letting them watch me break. That night, I ran away with a backpack and a shaking breath, telling myself I'd rather sleep anywhere than go back. I thought the worst part was over. I was wrong. A few hours later, a black SUV rolled up beside me. A man grabbed my arm, and I was shoved into the back seat so fast I honestly believed I was being kidnapped. Then the man sitting in the dark looked straight into my eyes and said 5 words that made my whole life tilt. I'm your biological father. Before I tell you what happened next, hit like and subscribe if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, and tell me where you're watching from so I know I'm not alone out here. For a few seconds after he said those words, I couldn't even process what they meant. My first instinct was pure panic. My hand went straight for the door handle, my heart hammering so hard it felt like it might crack my ribs. The door didn't open. The man in the driver's seat noticed immediately and pressed a button on the console. "It's unlocked," he said calmly. "You're not trapped." The car slowed, pulling to the side of the road under a dim streetlight. My fingers hovered on the handle, but I didn't move. I was breathing too fast, my mind trying to catch up with everything that had happened in the last 10 minutes. The slap, the backyard full of people, running down the dark sidewalk with tears blurring the streetlights. And now this stranger claiming something impossible. The man sitting across from me leaned forward slightly, just enough for the faint light from the dashboard to reveal his face. He looked nervous, like someone about to step onto thin ice. "My name is Caleb Whitman," he said quietly, "and I've been trying to find you for 19 years. I stared at him, searching his face for something familiar, something that would prove he wasn't insane. I didn't see it right away. All I saw was a tired man in his 50s with worry lines carved deep around his eyes. Then he reached slowly into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a photograph. "Before you decide I'm crazy," he said, holding it out carefully, "please look at this." I hesitated, but curiosity beat fear. I took the photo. It was old, slightly faded at the edges. A young woman stood in the center, smiling at the camera, her hair blowing across her face in the wind. Next to her was a tall man with his arm around her shoulders. Between them, in the woman's arms, was a baby wrapped in a soft blanket. My stomach tightened before my brain even understood why. The baby had the same dark hair I'd seen in every mirror my entire life. The same crooked little eyebrow. I slowly looked back up at him. "That's my wife," he said gently, "and that baby is you." My mouth went dry. "That's not possible," I whispered. For 22 years, I had lived with one version of my life. I knew who my parents were. I knew where I came from. Even if they treated me like a burden, they were still my family, weren't they? Caleb didn't argue. He simply nodded once, like he expected the reaction. Sitting beside him in the back seat was a woman in a dark blazer who had been silent until now. She offered a small professional smile. "My name is Erin Caldwell," she said. "I'm an attorney. I represent Mr. Whitman." That single sentence made my chest tighten even more. Lawyers didn't show up in the middle of the night unless something serious was happening. Caleb glanced toward the driver, then back at me. "We didn't mean to scare you," he said. "You were standing too close to the road and a car nearly clipped you. My driver pulled you in because he thought you might get hit." I remembered the blur of headlights rushing past just before the SUV stopped. Maybe that part was true. Maybe I hadn't been kidnapped at all. But that still left the bigger question hanging in the air between us. "Why now?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "If you're really who you say you are, where have you been my whole life?" Caleb looked down at his hands for a moment before answering. "In a hospital bed for months," he said quietly. "And after that, fighting paperwork that said you were no longer my daughter." The words didn't make sense. Not yet. My brain kept snagging on that photograph, on the baby that looked exactly like me. Erin leaned forward slightly and placed a thin manila folder on the seat between us. "We've been investigating this for over a year," she said. "It started when Mr. Whitman found evidence that the documents transferring custody after your mother's accident may not have been legitimate." Accident. The word landed heavy in my stomach. I had been told my biological mother died when I was a baby. It was always described as something tragic but distant, like a story that belonged to someone else's life. Now it suddenly felt very close. Too close. I looked from the folder to Caleb again. "Why would anyone fake something like that?" I asked slowly. He didn't answer right away. His eyes flickered toward my backpack sitting on the floor near my feet. "That," he said quietly, "is what we're hoping you might help us understand." I followed his gaze and realized the zipper of my bag had partly opened when I was pulled into the car. The corner of an old, crumpled envelope was sticking out, the same envelope I had grabbed earlier that evening while cleaning out the garage. At the time, I didn't even know why I kept it. Something about it just felt wrong. Now, sitting in the back of that SUV with a stranger claiming to be my father, I had the strange feeling that the answer to everything might already be in my hands. My fingers went numb as I pulled the envelope out of my backpack. It was creased like it had been folded and unfolded 100 times, the kind of paper that had lived too long in a drawer where secrets go to die. I hadn't even meant to take it. Earlier that evening, before the party started, I'd been forced into the garage to clear space because my dad wanted to make room for something better. That's what he called it when he bought himself things he didn't need. I was dragging old boxes toward the trash when I saw the envelope wedged behind a paint can. No return address. Just a printed label with my wrong name and the house address. Something about seeing my name on something I'd never been allowed to touch made my stomach twist, so I slipped it into my bag before anyone could notice. Now, I laid it on my lap in the back seat of the SUV like it was a live wire. Caleb watched me carefully, not rushing, not demanding. Erin's expression changed in the smallest way, like she recognized the shape of the paper before I even opened it. "Go ahead," she said softly. "If it's what I think it is, it matters." I swallowed and tore the edge. Inside were several sheets, some older than others, all printed in that official government font that makes your chest tighten before you've even read a word. The first page had numbers in bold and a header that made my brain stall. Adoption assistance, federal and state benefits. Then another page with a different header. Tax credit documentation, claim dependents, filing years, amounts. I stared at the totals and felt my throat go dry. I didn't understand every line, but I understood enough. There were yearly entries, one after another, stretching back nearly 2 decades, and each year had money attached to it. Thousands, some years more than others. I looked up, my voice shaking with disbelief. "What is this?" Erin didn't hesitate. "It's a trail," she said. "A financial trail." Caleb's jaw tightened like he was fighting anger that had been sitting in his body for years. Erin pointed to a section near the bottom. "This indicates your adoptive household received subsidy payments for your care," she explained, keeping her tone calm, almost clinical. "And these forms suggest they also claimed significant tax credits and dependent benefits. If these filings were fraudulent, it's not just a family issue, it becomes a legal issue." Legal issue. The words sounded too clean for what I was feeling. My hand started to shake, not from cold now, but from the sick realization spreading through my chest. "They got paid? For me?" I asked. The question came out small, like a child asking something obvious. Caleb nodded slowly. "If these documents are accurate," he said, "then yes. They benefited financially from having you in that house." My stomach flipped. I thought about the way I had been treated like hired help. The way I wasn't allowed to get my license because you don't need to go anywhere. The way I was told to buy my own school supplies from tip money I hid in my shoe, because it was the only thing I had that felt like mine. I remembered birthdays where I got a card with no cash inside while my sister unwrapped expensive electronics. I remembered begging for a dentist appointment when a tooth hurt so badly I couldn't sleep, and being told I was being dramatic. All those years I thought it was because I wasn't good enough. Because I was the difficult one. Because I was, somehow, wrong. But these papers were telling a different story. A colder story. A story where my pain wasn't accidental. It was profitable. Erin took one sheet and tapped a line with her fingernail. "This is especially important," she said. "This kind of paperwork usually doesn't just appear. Someone had to apply. Someone had to recertify. Someone had to keep you listed year after year." Caleb leaned in closer, his voice low. "Avery," he said, "there's another reason we came tonight. We didn't just find these forms." He paused like he hated the next part. "We found evidence that the signature on the document that stripped me of my parental rights was not mine." My breath caught. "What do you mean it wasn't yours?" Erin opened the manila folder she'd placed on the seat and slid out a photocopy of a legal form. At the bottom was a signature line with a name printed neatly beneath it. Caleb Whitman. It looked real at first glance, but then Erin pulled out a second page. A side-by-side comparison from a forensic handwriting analyst. The differences were circled in red. Slant, pressure, letter formation. Patterns that didn't match. "This is a preliminary analysis," Erin said, "but it strongly suggests forgery." Caleb's eyes were glassy now, but his voice stayed steady. "After your mother died," he said quietly, "I was injured badly. I was in and out of surgery. I couldn't even stand on my own, and during that time, people I trusted handled paperwork, people from our church, people who offered help." He swallowed hard. "Somewhere in that chaos, someone signed my name to a document that said I gave you up." My skin prickled. The pieces were clicking together in my head in a way that made me feel nauseous. The church connection. The way my adoptive parents always acted like pillars of the community. The way everyone treated them like saints for taking in a child. The way my dad loved being called a hero. "So you're saying," I whispered, "they didn't just adopt me?" Erin met my eyes. "We believe they acquired custody through fraud," she said. "And if they did, the financial benefits they collected could be considered part of that fraud." I looked back down at the envelope in my lap. My wrong name printed on the label. My life reduced to numbers and forms. And suddenly, the slap at the party didn't feel like a random outburst anymore. It felt like the same pattern: control, humiliation, keeping me small so I wouldn't ask questions, so I wouldn't look behind paint cans in the garage and find the truth. My voice came out sharper than I expected. "Why keep the papers?" I asked. "If they were doing something illegal, why wouldn't they destroy this?" Erin's lips pressed together. "People who think they're untouchable keep trophies," she said, "and people who build their image on being good sometimes believe paperwork is protection. They don't think the person they're exploiting will ever see it." Caleb watched me, his face full of something that looked like sorrow and hope at the same time. "You don't have to decide anything tonight," he said. "You can walk away. You can tell us to leave you alone. I won't force myself into your life." I stared at him for a long moment. The idea of having a choice felt unfamiliar, almost frightening. In my adoptive home, choices were punishments disguised as options. Do this, or else. Come back, or else. Smile, or else. But here, sitting in the quiet hum of the SUV, I realized something else. If Caleb was telling the truth, then the people who raised me weren't just cruel, they were criminals. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't thinking about how to survive them. I was thinking about how to expose them. We didn't drive to a police station that night. Erin said something that surprised me at first. "We can report it," she explained, "but if you're not safe, none of the rest matters. Tonight is about getting you somewhere secure, then confirming the truth in a way no one can twist." The way she said twist told me she'd dealt with people like my adoptive parents before, people who could smile in public and destroy you in private. Caleb didn't argue, and neither did I. By the time we reached downtown Denver, my body was running on exhaustion and adrenaline. The city lights looked unreal through the window, like a different world I wasn't sure I was allowed to enter. The SUV pulled into a well-lit hotel entrance with cameras over the doors. A uniformed security guard nodded at the driver like they were expected. Erin walked in first, scanned the lobby, then motioned for me to follow. I noticed little things that made my chest loosen by a fraction. The front desk didn't know my adoptive father. No one here looked at me like I owed them anything. No one barked orders. No one told me to stand up straighter or stop making a scene. Erin checked us in under her name, then handed me a keycard. "You're on the same floor as us," she said. "If you need anything, you knock. If you hear anything you don't like, you lock the door and call me." It sounded like basic safety, but to me it felt like someone finally taking my fears seriously. The room was quiet. Too quiet at first. My whole life had been filled with the sound of someone else's footsteps coming to find me. Here, the only noise was the soft hum of the heater and the distant traffic outside. The curtains were open when I walked in, and I froze. A wide window filled one wall, showing the dark outline of the Rockies in the distance, under a pale strip of moonlight. I didn't know why that hit me so hard. Maybe because in the basement back home, there was no window. Just concrete and a small vent that smelled like laundry detergent and dust. I dropped my backpack on the floor and stood there like I didn't know what to do with freedom. Caleb stayed near the door, giving me space. He didn't rush toward me like he was trying to claim me. He didn't call me sweetheart or try to hug me. He simply looked around the room like he was making sure it was real, then quietly set a photo album on the table. "These are yours if you want them," he said. "If you don't, I'll put them away." I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress soft enough that my body sank into it. It felt wrong, like I didn't deserve something that comfortable. My cheek still throbbed from the slap, and when I touched it lightly I felt the heat there, the lingering proof of what happened. Proof. That word kept repeating in my head. The slap had been proof. The envelope had been proof. But the biggest proof was still missing, the one thing that would make everyone stop calling me dramatic. "I want a DNA test," I said suddenly, My voice was steadier than I felt. As soon as possible. Tomorrow morning. Erin nodded without hesitation. Already scheduled, she said. There's a LabCorp collection site a few blocks away. They open early. Chain of custody. Certified results. The kind that holds up. Caleb's eyes flickered with relief, but he didn't celebrate. He simply nodded like he respected the decision more than he needed the comfort. Whatever you need, he said. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my sister's phone pointed at my face. I heard the laughter. I felt the sting on my cheek. Then I remembered the photo of the baby and the woman smiling into the wind, and a different kind of pain rose in my chest. Grief for a mother I never got to know, and anger at the people who stole the chance. When morning finally came, the sky was a cold gray. Erin met me in the lobby with coffee and a small paper bag of breakfast I wasn't sure I could swallow. Caleb walked beside me without touching me, like he was afraid one wrong move would send me running. At the lab, the fluorescent lights were harsh, the air smelled like sanitizer, and the waiting room was full of people staring at their phones. To them, it was a routine appointment. To me, it was a verdict. The technician checked my ID, and my stomach dropped. I didn't have one. No driver's license. No state ID. My adoptive parents had always handled that. Erin stepped in smoothly, presenting paperwork and explaining the situation in careful legal language. The technician nodded, made a few calls, and accepted alternative verification. A few minutes later, I was sitting in a small room with a swab being rubbed along the inside of my cheek. Simple. Quick. Almost insulting that something so small could decide something so huge. Caleb did his swab too, hands steady, eyes fixed on a point on the wall like he couldn't bear to watch. Erin sealed everything in tamper-proof packaging and signed forms while the technician watched. "This is clean," Erin told me as we walked out. "No one can claim it was faked." Back at the hotel, the waiting was its own kind of torture. Erin said the expedited results could come within a day. A day felt like a lifetime. I tried to eat, but my stomach refused. I kept thinking about going back for my things, and then remembering that my things were not worth walking into that house alone. Caleb didn't push conversation. He just sat in the chair by the window with the album closed in his lap, like he was holding something fragile. At some point, I finally asked the question that had been burning behind everything else. "If you've been looking for me," I said, "why didn't you find me sooner?" Caleb exhaled slowly. "Because every time I got close," he said, "the trail went cold. Different addresses, different school records, and people who smiled at me and told me they'd help, then never returned my calls." He looked at me then, and the emotion in his eyes made my throat tighten. But I never stopped. That afternoon, Erin's phone buzzed. She stepped into the hallway to answer, then came back into the room with a piece of paper in her hand. She didn't smile. She didn't soften it. She simply handed it to me like she was giving me back my own name. My eyes scanned the bold numbers at the bottom. Probability of paternity: 99.999%. The room went silent. My hands started shaking so badly the paper rattled. I looked up at Caleb, and for the first time I saw it clearly. Not just the eyes, the shape of his jaw, the way his brow moved when he was trying not to cry. My voice came out as a whisper. "It's you." Caleb didn't rush to hug me. He didn't make speeches. He just nodded once, like the truth was both the best and worst thing he'd ever been given. "It's me," he said. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. For 19 years, I had been treated like a burden that someone reluctantly carried. Now I understood the real story. I hadn't been unwanted. I had been taken. Erin didn't let the shock sit for long. Not because she was cold, but because she understood something I was only beginning to learn. Truth without protection can still leave you vulnerable. The moment the DNA confirmed Caleb was my biological father, she shifted into strategy mode. The first thing she asked for wasn't a dramatic statement, just a timeline. When the party started, when the slap happened, when I left the house, when the SUV stopped. She wrote everything down carefully and then looked up at me. "We're going to build this the right way," she said. "Clean, documented, impossible to dismiss." That phrase stuck with me. My entire life had been people dismissing me. Too sensitive, too dramatic, misunderstanding things. Erin wasn't interested in opinions. She wanted proof. Within hours, the hotel room turned into a quiet planning space. Papers from the envelope were spread across the desk, while Erin made a series of calm, precise calls. She requested certified records, contacted a forensic handwriting analyst, and reached out to a tax specialist who could explain those financial documents in a way a judge would take seriously. Caleb stayed nearby, watching silently, the way someone does when they're afraid one wrong move could make everything disappear. At one point, Erin noticed me touching my cheek where the slap had landed. She asked if she could photograph the mark for documentation. I nodded. For the first time, I didn't want that moment to fade. I wanted it recorded. Erin took the photos in clear light and asked me to repeat exactly what Derek said before and after he hit me. She wrote down every word. Then she asked something that made her pause. "Was anyone recording besides your sister?" I told her the slap happened during a TikTok live stream. Erin's expression sharpened instantly. "Live means witnesses," she said. "Live means timestamps." Within minutes, she drafted a request to preserve the video and had me search online for clips that had already been reposted. We found several. I started reading the comments and felt my stomach twist, but Erin gently stopped me. "Let me handle that part," she said. Later that evening, she asked about my personal documents: birth certificate, social security card, ID. I didn't have any of them. My adoptive parents always claimed they kept them safe. Erin nodded like she expected that answer. "Then we'll request them formally," she said. "If they refuse, that becomes evidence too." Not long after, my phone lit up with a message from Derek. He didn't use my real name. "Where are you, Maddie? You embarrassed me. Come home now." I stared at the screen as the next message arrived. "If you don't come back, don't call this family yours." Erin held out her hand and I gave her the phone. She took screenshots while Derek kept texting. The tone flipped from anger to fake patience. "I forgive you. Come home and we'll talk." When I didn't respond, the threats returned. "You have nothing without me. I can make this very hard for you." Erin saved every message calmly. "This shows control and motive," she said quietly. Then another text appeared from Janine telling me I was confused and needed to stop talking to strangers. She even attached an old childhood photo of me smiling at their kitchen table, like proof they had been loving parents. Erin stored that too. "They're building their version of the story," she said. "We're building the truth." The next afternoon, a letter arrived at the hotel addressed to me. Derek's handwriting was neat and careful, the tone almost polite. He said he loved me. He said I was making a mistake. He claimed Caleb was manipulating me. And at the very end, he slipped in a quiet warning. "If you keep this up, I'll tell everyone why you really ran away." Erin placed the letter in a plastic sleeve like evidence from a crime scene. "He's trying to scare you into silence," she said. "Because he knows if you speak, everything unravels." By evening, Caleb returned with information from a private investigator. Public records, financial links, and a past connection between Derek and a social worker involved in adoptions years ago. The more pieces we gathered, the clearer the pattern became. I looked at the growing stack of documents on the desk and felt something new rise in my chest. Not fear. Power. Erin asked me one final time if I was sure. "Once we file," she said, "this becomes public." I thought about the slap, the laughter, and Derek's threats arriving faster than any apology. Then I looked at her and answered without hesitation. I'm not going back. I want this in court. The morning of court didn't feel like a movie. It felt like standing on the edge of something cold and permanent. Erin met me in the lobby with a slim binder tucked under her arm and the kind of calm you only get from being prepared. Caleb stood on my other side, hands in his coat pockets, not touching me, just there. When we walked into the Denver courthouse, the air changed. Everything echoed. Every step sounded louder than it should, like the building itself wanted you to know it was serious. Across the hallway, Derek Langford was already there in a crisp suit, smiling too widely, shaking hands with people like he was at a fundraiser instead of a hearing about my life. My stomach turned, but Erin leaned in and whispered, "Don't look at him. Look at me. Today is not about his performance. It's about facts." In the courtroom, Derek's smile stayed glued to his face until he saw the binder Erin placed on the table. Then it twitched. The judge entered, and Erin started with the cleanest part first, the DNA results. The words, 99.999% landed like a hammer. Derek's attorney tried to object, but Erin had the lab certification, the chain of custody, and the signatures to shut it down. Next came the handwriting analysis. Erin held up the old relinquishment document, then the forensic comparison, the red circles showing the inconsistencies. She didn't accuse, she demonstrated. Derek's jaw tightened. When it was his turn, he stood and spoke like a man who believed charm could erase damage. He called me troubled. He said I was ungrateful. He claimed I ran away because I didn't want rules. Then Erin played the clip from the birthday party. Not the whole thing, just the moment his hand struck my face and the backyard went silent. You could hear my sister's laugh in the background before she realized people were watching. Derek's face drained of color. Erin followed with the messages on my phone, the ones that swung from "come home now" to "I can make this very hard for you." She read them without emotion, and somehow that made them worse. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing, and asked Derek a simple question about the financial documents. Derek tried to deny everything, but Erin had the subsidy forms, the tax filings, and a witness statement from a former caseworker who had agreed to testify about the payment that moved the paperwork along. Derek's voice rose, his control slipping. He pointed at me and shouted the wrong name, the one he used to keep me small. Maddie. The judge cut him off sharply and warned him to speak respectfully. For the first time in my life, Derek looked afraid. Erin didn't smile. She just opened her binder to the final tab and said, "Your Honor, we are asking this court to recognize that this adoption was obtained through fraud and that the financial benefits were collected under false pretenses." And then she turned to me and nodded once. It was my turn to speak. When I stood up, my knees threatened to shake, but I kept my hands flat on the rail in front of me and looked at the judge, not at Derek. Erin had told me to tell the truth like I was reading a receipt. Simple, clear, no begging, no proving I deserved basic respect. So I spoke about the basement room with no window, about being 11 years old and scrubbing floors while my sister went to sleepovers, about hiding tip money in my shoe because asking for lunch money started fights. I talked about the slap, not as drama, but as a pattern. Derek didn't bother to hide anymore because he thought I had nowhere else to go. Then I said the sentence that felt like cutting a rope. My name is Avery Collins, and I am done answering to the name he used to control me. The courtroom went quiet in a way that felt different from that backyard. This silence had weight. The judge asked Derek a few questions, and Derek tried to talk his way out like he always did, but the evidence didn't care about his charm. In the weeks that followed, the court's decisions came down piece by piece, each one closing a door Derek used to slam in my face. The fraudulent paperwork was referred for criminal review. Restitution was ordered for the benefits collected under false pretenses, and liens were placed that forced his finances into the open. His property business, the one he used as proof that he was a respected man, started collapsing under audits and legal costs. The church board asked him to step down. Sponsors and clients disappeared. The same people who smiled at his parties stopped answering his calls. My sister's live video didn't disappear like she hoped. It got copied, reposted, and stitched into 100 reactions. And for the first time, the humiliation wasn't mine, it was theirs. I didn't celebrate like it was revenge. I felt relief. And then I felt something even stranger. Space. Space in my chest where fear used to live. Cassidy left town and got a job that didn't come with applause. Janine tried to send a message about forgiveness, but I didn't reply. I wasn't angry all the time anymore. I was learning boundaries, and boundaries don't require arguing. They require decisions. I moved into a small studio in Capitol Hill with a real window that let morning light touch the walls. The first week I kept forgetting I was allowed to open the curtains. Caleb helped me replace what I never had: a state ID, a social security card, a bank account in my own name. I started GED classes at night. And during the day, I took an intro course in graphic design because I wanted a future that belonged to me, not one I earned for someone else. On Sundays, Caleb cooked dinner at the house that used to belong to my mother. There was a red door and a porch swing that creaked softly when the wind hit it. Sometimes we talked about her. Sometimes we didn't. He never forced memories on me. He just made room for me, the way a parent is supposed to. The lesson I took from all of this isn't that blood automatically makes a family, because it doesn't. And paperwork doesn't either. Family is the person who waits 19 years and still shows up, not to own you, but to give you a choice. It's the person who calls you by your real name, even when no one else ever bothered. If you've ever been made to feel like a burden by the people who were supposed to protect you, I want you to hear me clearly. You are not a payment. You are not an inconvenience. You are not the role they assigned you. You deserve safety, respect, and a life that feels like yours. And if this story hit you, tell me in the comments the name you want to be known by, and one boundary you're finally ready to set. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't payback. It's becoming someone they can't control anymore. Thank you for listening. Honestly, what hit me the hardest wasn't just the slap at that birthday party, it was the way they tried to rewrite Avery's reality for years. Like her pain didn't matter as long as their image stayed perfect. And to me, the real revenge wasn't screaming or payback, it was the truth showing up with receipts, boundaries, and the courage to walk away. Avery getting her real name back felt like the most powerful ending possible. Now I'm curious, what would you have done in her place the moment you found out the truth? And what's one boundary you wish you had set earlier with someone who didn't respect you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Natalie Harper, I'm 30, and I used to think rock bottom would feel like silence. Turns out rock bottom can come with a ring light, a live stream, and an audience. Earlier that day, I'd finally gotten an offer to get my life back on track, an event manager role with a tech company, double my last pay. I didn't tell the whole family. I only mentioned it to my mom that morning because I wanted to stop being the problem in her stories. I drove home around 6, tired but hopeful, rehearsing how I'd say, "I'm moving out soon. I'm good now." Then I saw it. Black trash bags lined up on the driveway like someone had taken my life, stuffed it into plastic, and set it out for pickup. Before I could even ask what was happening, my mom lifted her phone and started filming, laughing like this was a skit. She called me 30 and said I'd been living in her basement like a parasite, and that I needed to get out now. Behind her, a voice chirped with that performative sweetness people use when they want the internet on their side. Someone was live streaming, calling me the loser sister, telling thousands of strangers I owed my mom $6,500 in back rent. Another family member stood there smirking like a bouncer at my own home, and my dad stepped forward long enough to toss my car keys at me and say I wasn't his daughter anymore. Even the neighbors leaned out from their porches, phones up, shouting about my beat-up Honda dragging down their property values like my existence was a stain on the neighborhood. I should have yelled. I should have cried. Instead, I did the one thing they couldn't stand. I smiled. I loaded every bag into my trunk like I had all the time in the world. Then I turned back to the little crowd they'd built around my humiliation and said, "Enjoy this moment, you'll be hearing from me soon." I drove away with my hands steady on the wheel, but my mind was already making a list, not of revenge fantasies, but of facts, dates, and receipts. Because they thought kicking me out on camera was the ending. They had no idea it was the beginning. And if you've ever had family turn your pain into entertainment, stay with me. Because 3 months later, my phone lit up like a fire alarm with 86 messages begging me to come back. That night, I slept on my best friend's couch in downtown Raleigh, staring at the ceiling while her ceiling fan clicked like a metronome. My body was exhausted, but my brain wouldn't shut off. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mom's grin behind her phone, like she'd finally caught proof I was the family disappointment. Around 2 in the morning, I stopped trying to sleep and started trying to think. Not about how to hurt them, but how to protect myself. Because the part that kept echoing wasn't the insults, it was the confidence. The way they said things like they were untouchable, like they'd already decided the story and the internet would agree. By sunrise, I knew exactly who to call. My grandfather, Walter Harper, had been gone for 3 years. But he was the only person in that house who ever looked at me like I wasn't a burden. Before he passed, he'd told me, in his quiet way, that people show you who they are when money and power are on the table. He also told me he'd handled things, so I'd never be trapped. Back then, I assumed it was just something comforting people say, but sitting on a stranger's couch with my whole life in trash bags, I realized he probably meant it. I dug through old emails until I found the name I needed: Mitchell S. Carver, the attorney who'd handled my grandfather's estate. When he answered, his voice was calm, like he'd been expecting this call for years. I told him what happened, and there was a pause on the line, the kind where you can feel someone choosing their words carefully. Then he asked one question that made my stomach drop in a different way. "Did they ever tell you what you own, Natalie?" I didn't even know what to say. Own. I thought he meant my car, or the couple thousand in savings I'd been guarding like oxygen. He meant something else. He told me my grandfather didn't just leave behind memories. He left a trust. And in that trust, I was listed as a beneficiary with real percentages, real property, real rights. 40% of the house my parents lived in, 50% of my grandfather's beach place out in the Outer Banks, and 35% of the commercial building tied to my dad's small construction company. I sat up so fast the blanket slid off my shoulders. Mitchell didn't sound surprised by my shock. He said copies of the documents had been delivered to the family after the funeral, but most people only read the parts they want to be true. According to him, the trust also had conditions. Major decisions like refinancing, using the properties as collateral, or changing tenancy agreements required consent from every listed owner. Which meant no matter how loudly my parents acted like they controlled everything, they didn't. Then, Mitchell said something that made the whole ugly scene from the driveway snap into focus. "Someone went through your belongings. They were looking for something." I told him my mom had been weirdly focused on calling me a parasite, like she needed witnesses. Mitchell let out a slow breath and said, "If they found proof you had a new job, it would ruin the narrative they've been selling. And when people build their status on a story, they panic when the truth shows up." After I got off the phone, I opened my email and stared at my offer letter again. That was the real reason I'd been kicked out on camera. Not because I was hopeless, but because I wasn't. I started my new job the following Monday, moved into a tiny studio on the edge of town, and kept my head down. I didn't respond to a single call, text, or DM. I sent everything to Mitchell instead. And while my family was still waiting for me to beg, my grandfather's attorney was drafting the kind of letter that doesn't argue, doesn't insult, and doesn't negotiate. It just states ownership, demands an accounting, and makes people who thought they were untouchable suddenly realize they've been standing on someone else's property this whole time. By the end of that first week at my new job, my phone didn't feel like a device anymore. It felt like a siren. Calls, voicemails, texts, Instagram DMs, even a message request from an account with no profile picture that only said, "Pick up." I didn't. I kept my ringer off, my notifications muted, and my focus locked on two things: learning my new role and letting my attorney do the talking. Because the more they chased me, the more obvious it became that this wasn't about family. It was about control. The first message was from my mom, sweet as syrup and just as fake, asking if I was safe. The second was sharper, demanding I come home and stop this drama. Then came the guilt, the crying emojis, the Bible verses, the sudden memories of how much they'd done for me. It was like watching someone cycle through every manipulation tool in a box, hoping one would still work. And then, right on schedule, the tone changed. My dad texted me a single sentence. "We need you to sign something." No explanation, no apology, just an order. That's when I knew Mitchell had hit the nerve. Brooke was worse. She didn't even pretend it was about my feelings. She messaged me. I deleted the live stream from my page, but I still have the file. "If you just talk to Mom, we can make a reconciliation video. It'll fix everything." Fix everything meant fix her engagement, fix her sponsors, fix the comments calling her a bully. Ryan tried the fake concern route. He sent, "Please don't do anything crazy. Mom's a mess. Dad's under stress. We're worried about you." But 2 minutes later, he followed it with, "Just tell Mitchell to stop." That was the thing. None of them were asking how I was. They were asking how to shut my lawyer up. I forwarded every message to Mitchell, every voicemail, every screenshot, and he replied with one line that made my chest tighten and my spine straighten at the same time. "Do not respond. Let them write their own evidence." While they were blowing up my phone, Mitchell was doing what my family never bothered to do. He was reading numbers. He requested an accounting for the Outer Banks property and the commercial building, because once you have ownership on paper, you have the right to know where the money went. 2 days later, he called me while I was in the break room at work, staring into a vending machine like it held answers. His voice was calm, but I could hear the edge underneath it. "Natalie, there is rental income that was never distributed to you." My stomach dropped. He explained it plainly, like someone reading a weather report. The beach house had been rented out seasonally for years. The commercial building had tenants tied to my dad's business. And based on the records he'd pulled, my parents had collected roughly $48,000 that should have been partially mine. Not a dime had been sent to me. Not a statement, not a check, not even a mention. They'd been cashing my share like it didn't exist, while calling me a parasite for paying $450 a month to sleep in a basement. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes, not because I was about to cry, but because the anger was so clean it felt like clarity. All those years of being told I was irresponsible, all those little humiliations at holidays, all those comments about how I'd never make it, and they were the ones quietly taking money that belonged to me. Mitchell said the next step was simple. He had already sent a certified letter stating my ownership percentages and demanding repayment of back distributions. He also included a formal notice that any decisions involving refinancing, collateral, or changes to property agreements required my consent. That's when I understood why my dad wanted me to sign something. It wasn't peace. It was paperwork to make me disappear. Mitchell also told me something else, and this part made the hair on my arms lift. "There were recent inquiries with the bank tied to your father's company. Not confirmed, but enough to raise questions. If they tried to leverage those properties without you, it could become a serious problem for them." I looked down at my hands, still wearing the cheap watch I'd bought years ago because I never felt like I deserved something nicer. My family had built their confidence on the assumption I'd stay small, stay confused, stay grateful for scraps. But now, they had a new problem. I wasn't begging. I was working. I was documenting. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't arguing with them. I was letting the system do what it does when people get caught playing games with other people's assets. That night, I sat in my tiny studio apartment surrounded by half-assembled furniture and cardboard boxes, and instead of feeling lonely, I felt light. Because I finally understood the truth. They didn't kick me out because I was a failure. They kicked me out because I was about to stop being one in their story. And the moment Mitchell's letter landed in their mailbox, the panic wasn't emotional. It was financial. The kind of panic that makes people do desperate things. The kind that makes banks start asking questions. And the kind that turns a family who called you nothing into a family who suddenly cannot live without your signature. The first time someone showed up at my door, it wasn't my parents. It was my mom's cousin, a man I barely knew, holding a gift basket like he was delivering sympathy instead of scouting an opportunity. I saw him through the peephole standing too close to my door, smiling at nothing, shifting his weight like he'd rehearsed this scene. When I didn't open, he knocked again, louder, and called my name like we were close. Then he slid a note under the door that said, "Family is family. Don't do anything you can't take back." I picked it up with 2 fingers, took a photo, and sent it to Mitchell. He texted back within a minute. "Do not engage. Save everything." A few hours later, I walked out to my car and noticed a second car parked across the lot with the engine running. I didn't panic. I didn't confront. I just waited, counted to 30, and watched as it slowly rolled away. By the time I got to work, Ryan had already arrived. He was standing near the entrance of my building, trying to look casual, like he just happened to be in that part of Raleigh in the middle of the day wearing his best button-down. When he saw me, he stepped into my path with that soft voice he used when he wanted something. "Nat, come on, let's talk." I told him I was late for a meeting. He said, "No, seriously, you're taking this too far. Mom's not sleeping. Dad's freaking out. You made your point. You can stop now." That word made my jaw tighten. Point. Like my humiliation on the driveway was just a misunderstanding that had spiraled. I asked him one question. "What did you do with my offer letter?" He blinked fast, then looked away. He didn't answer. He just tried a different angle. "Brooke is getting destroyed online. People are calling her a bully. Sponsors are asking questions. You could fix this if you just post something saying it was a family misunderstanding." I stared at him until he shifted again and said the quiet part out loud. "Dad needs you to sign." I didn't ask what. I didn't need to. I told him, "Talk to my attorney." Then I walked around him and went inside. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with an Instagram message from Brooke that made my skin crawl. She wrote like she was offering me a business deal. "Hear me out. We do a sit-down video. You tell your side, I tell mine. It'll blow up. People love redemption arcs. We can split the revenue." She attached a draft title with my name in it like I was a character she owned. When I didn't respond, she sent another message. "If you don't help me fix this, don't blame me for what Dad decides to do." I took screenshots, forwarded them, and went back to work. The next day, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a man introduced himself as Jim Caldwell. He said he was my dad's business partner, and his voice sounded tense, like he'd been walking around with a knot in his stomach. "Natalie, I'm calling because I just got a letter from your attorney, and I need to know what's going on before this blows up my livelihood." That one sentence told me everything. Mitchell hadn't just sent a letter to my family. He'd started pulling on the threads that held their whole image together. I told Jim I wasn't trying to destroy anyone. I was trying to get what was legally mine and stop being harassed. Jim exhaled hard and said, "Your dad told me you ran off and were threatening the family for money." Then he paused. "But the letter says you already own part of the building." That doesn't match what he told me. I didn't gloat. I didn't lecture. I said, "I can have Mitchell send you the trust summary and the accounting request." Jim thanked me, but he didn't sound relieved. He sounded worried. Because once someone like Jim realizes the story has holes, he starts asking questions that my dad can't bully into silence. That week, Mitchell sent a second certified letter. This one wasn't just about ownership, it was about harassment. It documented the calls, the workplace visit, the attempted intimidation through relatives, and Brooke's messages. It demanded back distributions of rental income and proposed a solution that made my parents furious because it took away their favorite weapon access. A professional property management company would handle the beach house and the commercial tenants going forward. Any income would be distributed properly. No more cashing checks in secret. No more pretending I didn't exist. And then Mitchell did the thing that made my dad's world tilt. He notified the bank in writing that there was a co-owner on record who had not consented to any refinancing, collateral, or loan activity tied to shared properties, and that any attempt to do so without consent could expose the bank to liability. The bank didn't accuse anyone in the letter. It didn't need to. It simply asked for clarification and documentation. In other words, it turned the spotlight on the one place my dad couldn't bluff his way through. That Friday, my mom left me a voicemail that sounded like someone performing grief for an audience. Her voice cracked, she sniffled. She said she didn't understand how her own daughter could be so cruel. Then, in the same message, she slipped and revealed the truth. She said, "Do you know what people are saying about us? Do you know what the neighbors are saying? Do you know what your aunt called me? It wasn't about missing me. It was about losing face." I deleted nothing. I saved everything. Because by then I could feel it. The pressure was building. The bank was watching. Jim was asking questions. Brooke was bleeding followers. And my dad, the man who'd thrown my keys at me and declared me dead to him, was running out of places to hide. I stayed quiet, let the letters land, let the panic rise, and waited for the moment they'd stop trying to control the story and start trying to survive it. The first time my dad tried to corner me, he didn't show up at my apartment. He showed up where he thought I'd be too embarrassed to make a scene. It was a small coffee spot near my office that I'd started going to for lunch because it was quiet and nobody asked questions. I was halfway through a sandwich when I felt a shadow fall across the table. I looked up, and there he was, sitting down without asking like he still had the right. His face was calm, almost polite, but his eyes were sharp. "Natalie," he said, lowering his voice, "we can handle this like adults." I didn't say anything. I reached into my bag and turned my phone face down on the table, screen up, recording. His gaze flicked to it, and I saw the smallest hesitation. Then he leaned in anyway. "You're making a huge mistake," he said. "You're going to ruin this family, and when you do, don't expect anyone to save you." I finally spoke, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. "You already told me I'm not your daughter." He smiled like I was being dramatic. Then he changed tactics, the way manipulators do when love doesn't work. He said, "If you don't sign what we sent, I'm going to tell people the real reason you lost your last job." I blinked. He didn't even know the details. He just knew the threat would land if it sounded believable. He continued, louder now, as if he was testing how much control he had over my shame. "I'll tell them you stole from the company. I'll tell them you've been lying for years. I'll make sure everyone knows what you are." My stomach went cold, not because I believed him, but because I realized how far he'd go to protect himself. I leaned back and said, very clearly, "That's defamation, and I'm recording you threatening me with it." His jaw tightened. For a second, the mask slipped, and I saw pure panic underneath. Then he tried to recover. "You think a recording is going to save you?" he hissed. "I have friends. I have connections. I can make your life miserable." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just repeated, "Talk to my attorney." And then I stood up, took my tray, and walked out like he was a stranger. That night, my mom called again, and when I didn't answer, she left a voicemail that started with crying and ended with rage. She said I was selfish. She said I was ungrateful. She said I was going to give her a heart attack. Then she said the line that always used to work on me. "After everything we did for you, you're choosing money over family." I listened to it once, saved it, and sent it to Mitchell. Because the more they spoke, the more they confirmed exactly what Mitchell had warned me about. People who rely on control will call boundaries cruelty. 2 days later, the bank made its first move, and it wasn't dramatic. It was procedural, which is always scarier. My dad's company line of credit didn't get canceled overnight like in a movie. It got paused. A formal notice went out requesting documentation and signatures for any loans tied to collateral where multiple owners were involved. Translation: they couldn't pull new funds until the bank verified consent. Mitchell explained it to me in plain terms. Banks don't like surprises. And they really don't like surprises involving trusts and co-ownership. If your father used those properties as collateral without you, the bank is going to protect itself first. That afternoon, Ryan texted me 6 times in a row. "Please just sign. Dad is losing it. Jim is asking questions. This is messing with payroll. You don't want people losing their jobs because you're mad." The guilt bait was obvious, but it still made my chest ache for a second, because that's what they count on. Then Mitchell called me with an update that snapped me back into focus. He said he'd obtained enough to confirm there had been recent attempts to restructure debt connected to the commercial building and the beach property. Not everything was finalized, but there was enough smoke that the bank was now looking closely at every file. He also reminded me about the trust language. It didn't just require consent. It allowed the trust to seek legal remedies and fees if a beneficiary's rights were obstructed or if assets were misrepresented. In other words, the more my family fought, the more expensive it became. And they'd already been fighting for almost 3 months. While the bank was tightening the screws, Brooke's world was collapsing in public. She'd tried to control the narrative by posting a teary story about family betrayal without naming me, but people connected the dots fast. Someone had saved her live stream. Someone always saves it. Clips started circulating with captions like, "Imagine humiliating your sister for content." Her comment sections turned into a courtroom. Sponsors stopped tagging her. One brand quietly removed her from a campaign carousel. And then she messaged me, not with an apology, but with desperation. "I can fix this if you let me post that we talked. Please, I'll do anything." I stared at that line for a long time. Do anything. 3 months ago, she could do anything to me. Now she was offering anything for herself. Mitchell didn't tell me to celebrate. He told me to stay disciplined. He said, "They want a reaction. Don't give it to them. Let the deadlines do the work." That's when he laid out the final timeline. My family had 1 week to agree to the settlement terms: repayment of back income, management oversight, and a written acknowledgement of harassment, plus a public correction of the lies. If they didn't, Mitchell would file, and the process would become public record. Court doesn't care about family roles or Facebook tiers. It cares about documents. It cares about money trails. It cares about who signed what and who didn't. That night, I sat at my small kitchen table in my studio apartment, looking at the city lights through my blinds, and I realized something that felt almost peaceful. I wasn't fighting them the way they wanted. I wasn't screaming. I wasn't posting. I wasn't begging people to take my side. I was letting consequences build quietly, brick by brick, until the weight became too heavy for them to ignore. And judging by the way their messages were escalating, they could feel it too. They were running out of threats, running out of leverage, running out of time. It was close to midnight when my doorbell camera lit up with motion alerts. At first I thought it was a delivery driver who got the wrong building, but then my phone buzzed again, and again, and I saw 4 familiar silhouettes clustered in front of my door like they owned the hallway. My mom kept adjusting her hair and wiping her cheeks like she wanted the camera to capture the best angle. My dad stood slightly behind her, arms crossed, jaw tight, scanning the door like he was looking for a weak spot. Ryan paced, checking his phone every few seconds, and Brooke held her own phone up the whole time, not even trying to hide it. Even now, they couldn't stop filming. I didn't open the door. I watched. My mom knocked softly at first and called my name in that sing-song voice she used when she wanted to sound like the victim. Natalie, honey, please. We just want to talk. Then she knocked harder and her voice cracked into something sharper. You can't ignore us forever. Brooke leaned toward the peephole area and whispered loudly like she was performing for an invisible audience. Just let us in. This is getting embarrassing. My dad stepped forward and said through the door, We're here as a family. Stop hiding behind lawyers. I laughed once, quietly, not because it was funny, but because it was unbelievable. 3 months ago, on that driveway, he'd told me I wasn't his daughter anymore. Now he was demanding I act like family because his world was falling apart. I spoke through the door without unlocking it. You said I wasn't your daughter. So talk to my attorney. There was a pause. Ryan tried next, his tone low and urgent. Nat, please. Dad's business is in trouble. The bank is on us. Jim is freaking out. Mom's taking heat from everyone. Just come home so we can handle this privately. Privately was their favorite word. Private meant no witnesses, no records, no consequences. My mom started crying louder, like turning up the volume would turn down my boundaries. She said she didn't mean it, that she was stressed, that she was scared, that she only wanted to motivate me. Then she said the sentence that made my stomach flip because it sounded like a confession wrapped in pity. We didn't know you would do this to us. As if I had attacked them, not the other way around. Brooke's voice snapped in, furious now. Okay, stop. She turned toward my door and said, If you don't answer, I'm going to post that you abandoned Mom. I'm going to tell everyone you're using Grandpa's money to punish us. I'm going to make you look like a monster. My dad hissed her name like she'd said too much. For the first time, I saw it clearly. They were not there to apologize. They were there to regain control of the story. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. The camera recorded everything. After 10 more minutes of knocking, pleading, and threatening, they finally left, and my hallway went quiet again. My phone buzzed with a text from Mitchell a moment later. I assume they visited. I replied with one word. Yes. He sent back, Good. Save the footage. The next day, I ran into Jim Caldwell by accident in the most ordinary place possible, the grocery store. I was reaching for a carton of eggs when I heard my name, and when I turned, Jim looked like a man who hadn't slept. He didn't have my dad's swagger. He had the cautious posture of someone realizing he'd been standing on thin ice. He said, I'm not here to pressure you. I'm here to understand what I got dragged into. We stepped to the side near the end of the aisle, away from people, and he spoke fast like he needed to get it out before he lost his nerve. Your father told me for years that you were unreliable, that you were always in trouble, that you couldn't be trusted with anything serious. He said your grandfather knew that too, which is why he left things the way he did. Jim shook his head and looked straight at me. But that's not what I'm seeing, and it's not what the documents say. Then he said something that landed like a weight. He said, Walter originally wanted to leave you more, a lot more. In fact, there was a version where you had controlling interest in the commercial building. But your dad fought it. For years, he kept showing up at Walter's place with stories about you. He'd bring concerns, he'd bring proof, he'd bring complaints dressed up as love. And over time, Walter started writing protections into the trust instead of simply handing your dad the keys. Jim swallowed and added, I think your grandfather saw what your dad was doing. He just didn't want a war while he was alive, so he planted the landmines for after. My throat tightened, because it suddenly explained my whole childhood. Every time I tried to shine, my dad found a way to dim it. Every time I made a mistake, he treated it like evidence that I didn't deserve space in the family. Jim said the bank was demanding paperwork that didn't exist. He said there were loans and restructuring conversations that had depended on the assumption that your dad controlled everything, and now that assumption was collapsing. He also said something that made my pulse jump. Ryan has been calling around, trying to get people to say you agreed to sign. Your dad is desperate. He thinks if you look unreasonable, the bank will pressure you. Jim paused, then said quietly, I'm not going to let him use my name to bully you. I didn't thank him like he'd saved me. I just nodded because I wasn't looking for heroes. I was looking for the truth. Later that afternoon, Ryan texted me asking to meet, and for the first time, I agreed, but only in a public place, only for 10 minutes. And only because I wanted to hear what he'd say when he couldn't hide behind mom and dad. We met at a busy cafe downtown. Ryan looked smaller than I remembered, like stress had finally caught up to him. He didn't start with an apology. He started with fear. He said, Dad's going to lose everything. And if he loses everything, Mom will blame you forever. I watched him for a moment and then asked, Do you actually feel sorry for what you did to me? Or are you just scared of what happens to you? His eyes dropped. The silence stretched. Then he exhaled and finally said, I was jealous. The words came out rough, like they hurt to say. He admitted he hated that Grandpa liked me, that Grandpa respected my work ethic, that Grandpa talked about me like I could build something real. Ryan said Dad used that jealousy like gasoline. He'd tell Ryan that I thought I was better than everyone. He'd tell Ryan that I was ungrateful. He'd tell Ryan that humiliating me would teach me my place. Ryan's hands shook slightly as he wrapped them around his cup. He said, I didn't think you'd fight back. I thought you'd come crawling and Dad would be right again. And then he looked up, and his voice cracked. I didn't know about the money. I didn't know they were taking your share. When I asked why he stood there on the driveway anyway, he didn't defend himself. He just said, because it was easier to be on their side than to be the next target. That was the closest thing to honesty I'd heard from anyone in that family in years. I didn't forgive him in that moment. I didn't hug him. I didn't promise anything. I told him the truth. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this to protect myself. And if Dad loses control because he built everything on lies, that's not my fault. Ryan stared at the table, and for the first time, he looked like a grown man realizing that being the golden child still comes with chains. When we stood to leave, he whispered one last thing. Dad is going to try to make you look like the villain. He's already planning it. I met his eyes and said, Let him. Because this time, I have receipts, and he doesn't have a signature. That night, Mitchell forwarded me the final settlement draft. It wasn't emotional. It was clean. It was brutal in the way only paperwork can be. It required repayment, professional oversight, and public correction of the lies. And it gave my family one last chance to choose a controlled loss instead of a catastrophic one. I stared at the document on my screen, thinking about my mom crying at my door, Brooke still filming, my dad threatening me in a coffee shop, and Ryan admitting he helped because he was afraid. Then I turned off my phone and went to sleep. Because I knew what they were going to do next. They were going to beg. They were going to bargain. And when that didn't work, they were going to flood my phone with messages, acting like they missed me, acting like they cared, acting like they didn't throw me out like trash. But the deadline was set. And in a few days, they were going to learn the difference between a story they controlled and the truth they couldn't outrun. 7 days. That's how long my family had to decide whether they wanted to lose with some dignity or lose in a way that would follow them for years. Mitchell's settlement offer wasn't dramatic. It was just unforgivingly clear. Pay back the money they'd withheld from my share of the rental income. Cover legal fees. Put both the Outer Banks property and the commercial building under an independent property management company. Sign a written acknowledgement that they had lied about my so-called back rent and that the eviction and harassment had happened. Agree to a strict no-contact clause unless communication went through attorneys. And the one part my mother hated most, make a public correction. Not a vague apology. A real one. A post that said I wasn't a parasite, I didn't owe $6,500, and that the live stream and filming had been done to humiliate me. It also required them to personally tell the neighbors who'd shouted at me that night that they had been fed a story, and it was false. My dad tried to stall. He sent Mitchell a message asking for more time, then tried to shift blame, then tried to argue about numbers. Mitchell didn't argue back. He just reminded them that if they refused, the next step would be filing, and filings don't care about pride. Filings become record, and record spreads faster than any live stream. On the 6th day, Jim called Mitchell and confirmed what I already suspected. The bank had suspended any new access to credit tied to collateral connected to properties with disputed consent. My dad's company had to operate on cash flow alone, and cash flow was already tight. Subcontractors started asking questions. A larger client delayed a contract award. And the moment people in construction smell instability, they protect themselves. The money didn't just slow down. It started to back away. That same day, Brooke's influencer world finally snapped. One of her bigger sponsors quietly ended their partnership and didn't make an announcement. They just disappeared from her feed like she never existed. Another brand emailed her asking for clarification about a harassment incident. Her comments were full of people saying they'd seen the live stream, even though she kept insisting it was deleted. Someone reposted a clipped version with captions calling it what it was public humiliation for engagement. Brooke's follower count dropped so fast it looked like a broken elevator. The night before the deadline, my mom posted a long Facebook status about betrayal and ungrateful children, hoping her friends would rally around her. It didn't land the way she thought it would. An aunt I hadn't spoken to in years commented, "Deborah, why did you film your daughter being thrown out like garbage?" Another cousin wrote, "If this is true, you owe her an apology, not a sermon." My mom deleted those comments, but screenshots don't disappear. Nothing disappears. The next morning, Mitchell called me while I was getting ready for work. They accepted, he said. Just like that. No victory speech, no celebration. Just a fact. They had signed the agreement, every page, every clause. They would repay $25,000 in back distributions, on a structured timeline with penalties if they missed a payment. They would reimburse legal fees. They would turn over management of the beach house and commercial tenants to a professional company, meaning my parents could no longer use those properties as their private piggy bank. They would sign a statement admitting they had lied about my back rent and acknowledging the harassment, including the workplace visit and the door confrontation that my camera recorded. They would also agree that if they tried to contact me outside of the legal channel, each violation would trigger an additional financial penalty. And then came the part that felt almost unreal: the public correction. My mother had to post it on Facebook and leave it up. My father had to add his own statement in the comments confirming it. Brooke had to post an apology on Instagram, and not once, but 3 separate times, each one staying up for a full day, and each one including the fact that she had live-streamed my eviction and that the rent claim was false. She also had to remove any content referencing me and agree not to use my name, image, or story for future content. The agreement was written so tightly that even a vague family drama video that hinted at me could count as a breach. Brooke didn't lose everything she owned, but she lost what mattered most to her: control over the narrative and the income attached to it. My dad lost something too, and it hit him where he lived. The bank didn't charge him with a crime in my story, because this wasn't a courtroom thriller. But they did tighten terms, they did increase scrutiny, and they did cost him a major contract he'd been counting on. Jim didn't drop him publicly, but Jim stopped protecting him, and in a partnership that's the beginning of the end. My mother lost her audience, the one she'd built in real life. The relatives she used to impress with stories about her lazy daughter started asking me how I was doing, quietly, like they were ashamed they'd ever believed her. The neighbors who'd shouted at me didn't become my friends overnight, but two of them did come up to me weeks later when I was visiting the property management office to sign paperwork. One woman looked down and said, "I'm sorry. We didn't know." I nodded and kept walking. That was all I needed. I didn't want their approval. I wanted the lie to die. My own life got better in ways I didn't even have time to dramatize. I moved out of the studio into a clean one-bedroom closer to work, the kind of place I used to think I had to earn permission to have. I got a raise after my first review because my new team valued results, not family roles. I bought a newer used car, nothing flashy, just reliable, and I smiled at the irony of it. I wasn't trying to show anyone up. I was just building a life where I didn't have to beg for basic respect. I did hear from my dad once, and it wasn't a demand. It was a short message sent through Mitchell, which was the only allowed route now. He wrote that he was sorry for how things happened and that he hoped someday we could talk. It was the closest thing to accountability I'd ever gotten from him, but it arrived the same way everything else did, too late, and only after consequences. Ryan sent a message as well, also through the legal channel, saying he was trying to do better, and that he understood if I never trusted him again. I didn't reply to either of them. Not because I was angry every day, but because I didn't need closure from people who only offered it when they were cornered. Then, exactly 3 months after the night on the driveway, my phone lit up in the middle of the night like an emergency alert. 86 messages. Most of them came through old channels they forgot were still connected to me. Some were blocked numbers, some were social DMs, some were emails. The timestamps were almost comedic. Mom at 1:08 a.m. Where are you? Answer your phone now. Brooke at 1:12 a.m. I deleted the live stream. Please come back. We need to talk. Dad at 1:25 a.m. Call us immediately. The same voices that had laughed while filming me being kicked out were now frantic, demanding my attention like I was still their property. I stared at the screen in the dark, not feeling triumph exactly, just a quiet confirmation of everything I'd learned. They didn't miss me. They missed what they lost: the money they couldn't touch, the story they couldn't control, the power they assumed would always be theirs. I set my phone face down and went back to sleep. The lesson in all of this wasn't that you should destroy your family. The lesson was that you should never let anyone, even people who share your blood, convince you that you deserve humiliation. Respect is not something you beg for. It's something you require. And sometimes the strongest revenge isn't shouting or posting or trying to humiliate them back. Sometimes it's silence paired with receipts, boundaries paired with action, and the patience to let the truth do what it always does eventually. It finds daylight. If you were in my shoes and the people who were supposed to protect you turned your worst moment into content, what would you do? Would you chase their approval, or would you build a life that doesn't need it? Thank you for listening. What Natalie's family did was cruel and completely unfair. They turned a private struggle into public humiliation, then tried to control the narrative when consequences showed up. Instead of offering support, they chose ego, gossip, and attention over basic respect, and that says more about them than it ever did about her. If you were in her position, what would you do? Would you forgive and rebuild, cut contact and protect your peace, or fight back the smart way with boundaries, receipts, and legal help? Let me know in the comments.